Whether it's running a 40, doing the vert, going through the 3-cone, shuttle, there's a million different drills, a million different ways to be evaluated. You got people taking down numbers at every step along the way. You see it from the combine all the way down to D3 recruiting. If you can put up the right numbers, you got the right size and the right fit, it's going to open a lot of doors for you. Tonight we're talking all about camps, all about the recruiting aspect of going out and being evaluated by coaches and what it really means for the small school athlete. Joining me tonight, Dan Fedrosi, once again. What's going on?
Colby, great to be on. This is awesome. We're closing in on February signing date, and 2026s are right in the mix already. People are even targeting 2027s and younger. It's a wild time for recruiting. Excited to be talking a little bit about it tonight.
That it is. The D1 Rejects Recruiting Report powered by Alfonso Voltaggio at Suburban Ford of Romeo. Once again, we've talked about him. Small school football supporter, Saginaw Valley alum, and big-time fan of everything we got going on over here. So stop in, see him about test driving a new Ford. We're going to talk about some great talent here in a little bit. But first, talking about these camps. And, I think the big question is, one, how to decide where to spend your time. Because you only have so many free weekends, so many available times to go out and be evaluated in front of these coaches. What are some of those questions and how are they answered in terms of picking and choosing where you go and try and be evaluated?
You know, it's crazy. I've actually started to see some camp flyers, brochures, digital graphics start going out even the last few weeks. So people are starting to put their dates out there. Obviously, the biggest schools, your Division I, your Big Ten, your SEC schools are starting to set those. And I even saw my first mega camp out at Boston College. Couldn't believe my eyes when I started seeing those get set. But then I started realizing we're not that far off from hitting February, and people have to start setting their schedules. Let me go on record. I hate camps. I don't hate it from the standpoint of going. You do have to perform. You have to put yourself out there. But the camp game has really changed over the last, 10, 15 years even. You started seeing them swell to a point where you'll hear people reference going and getting 1 or 2 reps. And it's like, man, what did I just invest all my time and that money in just to try to get 1 or 2 reps at maybe a position drill? A lot of times you're going to run a 40, do all those standard combine drills, but how many 40s can you run? We're talking about in the game of football, these young men only sometimes 3, 4, 5 weeks away from their season starting for their own training camp. And we're going to put them through the rigors of a test like that and then expect them to go out and have a great senior year and put themselves in a position to be recruited off of that film. It's such a tough balance. In a lot of ways, I can't stand it. But if I'm a college coach, I've got to be able to see a move. I've got to be able to see your physical skill set in person so I understand it. But it always comes down to how many. It comes down to maybe how far do I travel to go to these camps and be in front of these coaches. It really comes down to legitimate interest. Are you having back and forth communication with coaches that says that they're seriously going to search you out at one of these camps, that they want you to come to their campus and they're legitimately going to spend at least a portion of that 3-hour window looking at your skill set? I think that's critical when you're going to camps from a recruiting standpoint. But there's also another part, and this is where I like talking to players and families that they're like, hey, listen, recruiting is great, but I just want to go and compete. And especially the younger players. If I'm a class of 2027, if I'm a class of 2028, even the incoming class of 2029, I'm telling them right now, put recruiting out of your mindset a little bit and go to these big camps and see some of these big time players. See some of these identified 2026s. See some of the rising 2027s and use that as motivation and use that as fuel to say, I can get there by working my tail off. Forget the recruiting stuff. Forget walking out with an offer. Go in, compete, battle, especially at the young ages. That's when camps are really beneficial. I'd like to kind of take it a little bit away from that recruiting, but I totally understand. The college coaches want to get a chance to see you, and you want a chance to compete in front of them for a potential opportunity at the next level.
Yeah, and it's hard to gauge. I mean, I've seen both sides of that. I remember going distinctly out to Cornell and working with their running back coach specifically for over an hour, just running through those specific type drills. Obviously, with breaks and things in between, they're not running us through, real tough training out there. But, it was me and 2 others, right? And so you talk about that one-on-one type experience. And after about an hour and a half, you got a pretty good evaluation if you're a coach. And if you can't make up your mind by then something else is going on, right? If you got to be able to get hands-on and do that. And I also remember, going to some of those quote-unquote mega camps, going up to Grand Valley where there's a lot of schools on that graphic, man. There's a lot of coaches there, but there's that many more kids looking for that opportunity. And the reps were a lot different. Reps were a lot different at those two institutions for a variety of reasons, obviously. But when you talk about from the recruit's perspective, when you get some kind of digital graphic or custom made type deal in the inbox, whether it be Twitter or email, a text, whatever that is that legitimate interest? Is that really them reaching out and vouching for you to show up to the camp, or is that something that you should just come to expect?
It's not enough in 2025. That's really what it is. It's a small piece for you to gauge whether it's legitimate, whether they truly have you on your board. And I think what I always tell families and I tell prospects, this is the simplest thing for them to do. If they just literally send you a graphic, like they could send 5,000 prospects the same thing in the same day in the digital age, you have to understand that is the baseline. That is the most simple thing that they can reach out to you about. You have to try to find a way to take it another step. I obviously love trying to get the high school coach involved to see if they will get some feedback, because a lot of times those relationships matter between the high school coach, between the college coaches. Hey, is he really on your board? If he's going to take himself away from our practices, let's not forget a lot of these high schools have summer practices, summer conditioning.
Yeah.
They're trying to get their own players that are also being recruited, both opportunities to play at the next level, which every high school coach wants, but also get them ready to help them win a state championship in the next few months. That balance, I think the high school coach can jump in and try to help to make sure that you're making that right decision. And if it's legitimate, if it's more than just a graphic, if your high school coach says, yeah, you're on their board, you're right there, then yes, absolutely go and compete and prepare yourself so that you can take that physical toll of going through an hour and a half of workout like you did.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the last big one is how many camps is too many? Right? Where do you draw the line of, you talk about, one, just the travel and what you're going to put most likely at this stage of your life, your family through. You're not going to be traveling solo to a lot of these deals, right? Mom or dad and whoever's going to be, coming to the car with you. You talk about maybe some overnight trips, depending on where you're looking at being recruited. Hopefully it's some day trips semi around there. But how many camps is too many, and where can you kind of draw the line?
Yeah, I think it's two things. Number one, each individual prospect has to find that specific number, first off, around that legitimate interest, but also how much can you physically handle?
Yep.
You're going to start to feel a point where you're worn down, and you have to try to kind of fall back on the experiences of you growing, going through your own training camp as a sophomore, maybe even last year as a junior for the class of 2026, and say, you know what? After 2, 3 days of our own training camps in August, I'm pretty worn out. Maybe a week straight of camps is going to take a major toll on my body. I don't know if I'm going to recover. So I think not only is it how many, but it's also about spacing them out to the best of your abilities.
Yep.
They cram these things all into June right now, going to maybe one a week. If you're able, from a financial standpoint and a time standpoint, to make it, your body should have time to recover to go along with the training that you're doing. Heck, maybe you're even working in the summer. You have a job. You have to navigate around that. There's a lot of things that you have to take into consideration. But the second piece that I would throw out there as a positive is, you're right. The families are going to go, but that can also be a really cool experience. A lot of parents are going to be sending their son or daughter off to college in the next year. You're not going to get as much of that time. So it's okay to take advantage of it. Again, as long as you have the finances, as long as you have the time, maybe you're not being pulled away with another child for another obligation. Go experience and maybe even spend a little time walking around the campus as a parent on your own. Get a feel, get a vibe.
Mm-hmm.
Great. I don't need to see my son run a 40. Maybe I can go walk around campus. Maybe I can go see how far it is from the dorm to the practice facility, so that if this opportunity works out, you can think about logistics. So there's a lot of positives you can take away from it as a parent as well, even though it might feel kind of stressful. So I think you, when you look at it from both sides, you'll find that perfect number for each individual prospect, but it really comes down to how much can your body take, because you do not want to waste your senior year as a class of 2026. And even as those younger players, you need to make the varsity team before you can be recruited. So if you go and burn yourself out at camps as a 2028 and you have a terrible fall training camp, what's the point? I think we really have to consider those things moving forward.
Yeah, man, you talk about being in the car for sometimes 4, 5, 6 more hours just to show up, and some kids roll out the car and run a 40. You can't do that. You absolutely cannot. And what long travel days and other things can do to the body and to the legs in particular, man, you got to make sure you get yourself right for those. And the mental side of it is big as well, but that physical aspect of just travel and wearing down is very real. Now, talk about a group of guys here that presumably did some things right at camp, because they're making it to the next level. Suburban Florida Romeo presents today's list of elite high school talent in the Southeast Michigan area. And we talked about a couple Warriors the last couple weeks. Let's keep this thing going with another new addition to Wayne State.
Yeah, I'm kind of excited to talk about some skill guys. Not to say I want to get away from the trenches, but we're
Oh
really
yeah.
diving into some skill guys today. And Drew Rankin from Northville, another quarter safety that is not afraid to get in the mix. And in the spread era, in the air raid era, where you have to be able to play on the hash, but also insert yourself into the box and become the seventh or eighth player at that point. He really fits that scheme, but I think it's going to be critical for Drew for how much can he gain from a mass standpoint in Wayne's strength and conditioning program? Because he's going to take some pounding, right? You've got to be able to roll down, fit in there, and you've got to be able to make contact the way he shows. And you've got to be able to do that for 3 or 4 years against sometimes 200 and 215-pound running backs. And he doesn't look to have that mass yet. So I think his skill set fits where he could really come in and do some really nice things, especially as like a special teams player probably earlier in his career. But with how aggressive he is, that mass and that his ability to put a little bit of weight on his frame, but not lose his athleticism, I think is going to be very favorable to him and kind of determine how much of an impact he can make for the Warriors.
You talk about the size at the running back position. You go back to the GLIAC even this last year, Eichelberger over with the Lakers, Myron Harris at Davenport, and there's more, but those guys kind of jump out right in mind of guys who have the size, but also they're going to be coming at you quick. There's not a whole lot of time between them getting the ball and getting into the secondary if they've got those holes and that offensive line does their job. And so for a guy at his position, he definitely has to do that. And he's got to do it quick if you want to see the field in this league.
Absolutely.
Now, to go back up and talk about the Huskies, talk about a big addition in the trenches for Michigan Tech.
Well, here's a funny one because the first clip of Mitchell Brewer's highlight from Bishop Foley is him carrying the football. Unbelievable skill set where they gave him the ball on a counter. It looked planned to me. I don't think it was a mistake. They turned around, handed it off to him, and he shows really good athleticism. I will say this. I am really not sure what other people are missing from a standpoint of his athleticism matched up with his physicality. If you're talking about maybe an inch here or there, this is the kind of kid that fits in, like we talked about last week, and becomes that sixth offensive lineman that fits in very quickly to that two deep. And at this position, you need so much of that. I think he's going to go up there and be just a dominant player at Michigan Tech. And really, the burden and the challenge will be on the Tech coaching staff to use him. I mean, this is a kid that you could be doing what Penei Sewell's doing to the Lions, where you're running hook and laterals to him with how athletic he looks. Extremely impressive. And I think, again, for the Michigan Tech team to take him and fit him into what Michigan Tech has always done, but they've adapted, run the football, put their team in good position to get down into the red zone and score. He looks like he's going to be almost a plug and play lineman. In some ways, I don't know what I'm missing, and I cannot wait to see him go up there and dominate. And again, another stretch of kids that have went from the Detroit Metro all the way up to Houghton. I think he's going to be another in that long line of successful players that's going to do a great job up there.
When we talk about position groups in the GLIAC, the wide receiver core at Grand Valley has been at the top of the list for, I think, a very long time. Now, they lose some big-time pieces, and they've lost a couple over the last couple of years. You look back to, like, J.J. Walker going to A&M. Now you lose some guys to graduation, a couple to the portal, and don't get me wrong, they still have some dudes coming back. We've had Kellen Reed on the show, and he's certainly become part of the face of that room. But talk about another big-time addition to the outside and the offense for the Lakers.
Well, Will Korenstra from Grand Haven High School is really that tailor-made Grand Valley wide receiver. When you watch his film, when you get a chance to see him in person, you're probably right. I don't know if there's a more tradition-rich position. I think I talked about it in one of our first episodes, the safety at Grand Valley. You think about some of the players like Scott Mackey, Jacob McGuckin, but you can also rival it on the other side of the ball with a Blake Smolin, with an Eric Fowler, some of the most dominant players. I didn't even mention David Kirkus as one of the first most dominant players I've ever seen in person or even on film. I think Will's got some very sneaky natural ability that puts him in almost like a launch pad ready to take off. Like, they're going to have some work to do. He's going to have to be refined a little bit. I want to call it smooth. I don't know if I would use the word raw with Will. I think he's pretty well prepared to go into this program and absolutely take off. He's going to be like the Alert 5 Tomcat in the first Top Gun, which is way better than the second, by the way. But he's going to be taking off. He's getting into the mix, but he's going to need that time to step in. This is not a player that's going to come in and just dominate from day one based off of what I've seen, because there is some refinement that needs to happen. He actually reminds me a lot of a Mark Thrash, another Grand Rapids product. And we did dive over to the west side a little bit here. So pulling out of Detroit and looking at some players outside of just one location in Michigan. But this is a player from the west side that reminds me a lot of Mark Thrash. that had a great career. I got a chance to coach at Saginaw Valley. He's very similar to that. And Mark in 2012, before a career-ending injury, was the best player in the league at the time. Again, I hate to put that much weight on Will, but if he goes in and he accepts that coaching and really buys into the tradition of Grand Valley, I think you're going to hear his name a lot for a very long time.
And I talk about the talent over there. Grand Valley, 6th in the GLIAC when it came to passing attack this last year. And that was a surprising statistic for me, pulling that one up. And that's an area they certainly want to improve. But we have talked about them, and we know that in between the tackles, they get the job done. And that's not always been exactly their bread and butter. They're not going to live and die by the pass down there in Allendale by any means. But let's go to the other valley over at Saginaw and talk about a big addition to that linebacker core.
Well, I want to stick over on the west side again for this one. Muskegon High School has produced some of the best players really in the country for a very long time. And what Coach Fairfield, my first ever coach, has done there is nothing short of just incredible. Now, they didn't have the year that are the expectations at Muskegon High, but for Darekeo Speech, a linebacker that shows all the skill sets of being one of the next greats in the GLIAC. I think him going over to Saginaw Valley reminds me a little bit of a young Grant Caserta, who's now a defensive coach at Ferris, has got multiple national titles. But Grant was a linebacker on the last Saginaw Valley team to beat Grand Valley. That's how far back it goes. Not to say Grant's old, but you're talking about 2012, the last time the Cardinals would beat the Lakers. This kid could fit into that mix. I think he's really going to have to improve his strength and conditioning, and mostly his conditioning. You can actually see on film at a few times, he's laboring a little bit out there. And I can tell you, I'll go to my grave believing this. It's not because of a lack of fundamentals and technique, is what they're being coached over there by Coach Fairfield. My brother's the linebacker coach. Those kids get prepared better than anybody in the state of Michigan. I'm not afraid to put that out there. Those kids live and die football. You go to a game at Hackley on a Friday night, it's a bucket list item. I'd put it right up there with going down to Massillon, Ohio and seeing a game in that stadium. But what this kid is going to be prepared for, I think, is going to be one of the next great linebackers. But he's going to have to put some work in. It's not just going to be handed to him. There's a great tradition of linebackers at Saginaw Valley as well. Not only just Grant, who I think he fits really well with. You're talking about John Jacobs, who was one of the most dominant players after our time. And before that, the great John DeGiorgio, who had an unbelievable NFL career. Signed helmet right back behind me. Shout out the Bills, hopefully meeting the Lions in the Super Bowl. But the reality is he's got all the skill sets, but he's going to have to definitely put some work in. I could really see him as a 50-50 guy. Either he could be one of the best, or he may never even really see the field because he's got to push himself. And I think he can do it. I really hope he does.
Absolutely. And that Saginaw defense has been one. They've lost some of their top playmakers the last 2 years to the portal, have been poached, and now you lose some big pieces of that linebacking core, especially with Kretzinger gone after this season, who's been an anchor for that defensive unit. So you talk about a guy who takes all the right steps, could see himself very in the near future here playing a big-time role in that defense for the Cards, man.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, there's so much tradition at that position. For him to take over for Micah, I mean, again, I'm not saying it's going to be year one, but it could be a very easy transition. I think you're going to see another impact player playing in that, linebacker core for the Cardinals.
Absolutely. Let's talk about the defending national champs. Last but not least, Ferris State. Tell me about one of their newest additions.
Jami Williams from Grand Rapids Catholic Central, coached by Todd Colster, who really taught me everything about the game of football on the offensive side. They've been one of the most dominant programs in the state of Michigan. I mean, it was like Grand Rapids Catholic state championship, state championship, state championship. I mean, it was unbelievable. But what you see out of Jami is you see a very polished receiver for how big he is. He is extremely lanky. He reminds me so much of Israel Wolfert from Franklin, and now he's coaching in the NFL, that it's scary, right? Like, it's almost like going back in time 10 years when we were recruiting, actually more than 10 years ago when we were recruiting him. But for how smooth he is at the line of scrimmage, it's very surprising. Here's the thing, though. If he does not develop and gain a little bit of mass, I think he could struggle at Ferris getting off the press because he's going to play stronger corners than he played in high school. Now, he had some great battles going up against West Catholic. All those games that they played in were tough, but it's a different animal lining up there, going up and facing not only Grand Valley across the way, Saginaw Valley, but also just in practice. So for him to succeed and take that really good technique that I think he's already has and apply it to being a really more dominant player and not just being that big post player, right? Ferris is going to make you commit players to the box. You're going to have to stop the run. And if you can just hit one or two posts over the top a game, you're probably going to catch one of them, and one of them might be a touchdown. There's going to be so few people around him. He can be so much more than that. But I really think it's going to come down to how much he's going to want to develop, how much he's going to put the work in to kind of take that next step for himself, because he does not have the smoothest of ball skills. But his skill set is such that if he grows, he develops, and he works on that, and he gets ready to compete day in and day out at practice at Ferris, you could be talking about a really dominant player. Kind of a lot like Darekeo, a little bit on the fence. Could be one of the best, may get bypassed. I think it's all going to be on him with what he wants to do it because the skill set's there. But I think there's enough work to be done where it's going to be up to him how much he wants to push.
Absolutely. And they're going to find out a lot of that stuff pretty early on in August, man, especially when you talk about a squad like Ferris. Those first couple weeks are testing grounds and approving grounds for a lot of guys. And Ferris has not been shy about getting some big-time playmakers out of the portal. They also have a pretty wide reach and wide net when it comes to recruiting, even outside of the Midwest. We talk about some of their additions from down in the Sunshine State even, and they're not shy about going anywhere to get playmakers that fit the scheme. So you talk about a guy that's going to be tested very early on in a very physical and downhill culture there with Ferris.
Competition, Kobe. I mean, ultimately, that's what you want. You want to come in and compete, and that's what Coach Anise and the staff want.
Yeah.
That's what Coach Wooster and the staff want. That's what Coach Brady and the staff want. That's what Coach Wheatley's trying to create at Wayne. Bring in a bunch of guys to compete. Okay. And if you're the best player, you're going to play, because if you're the best player, you have a chance to help us win a national title. That's how good this league is. Okay. Same thing with Coach Metlick. That's why they went down to Bishop Foley and got a left tackle that can carry the football.
Yeah.
Compete, compete, compete. Sometimes it starts with those camps, but carry that over to your senior season for the 2026s and then carry it over to your next stop. That is the best approach when it comes to having a great senior year for the 2026s and taking it to the next level in college.
Absolutely. Very good insight once again. Remember to go see the pride of Utica Eisenhower today at Suburban Ford Romeo. Talk to our guy Fonz about getting you in a new Ford. Much thanks to him and to you. I appreciate the insight. I think it's been some really good stuff.
Great stuff. Enjoyed it. Looking forward to talking to you again soon.
Absolutely. Have a good one.